In addition to having an admission to a university or a college or an academic institution, it could actually be an English is a second language program. It could be a private secondary school. You're going to need to prove that your studies in Canada are in good faith, that the primary purpose of coming to Canada is your studies. It shouldn't be, I'm coming to Canada because I want to immigrate to Canada and I know that this is the way to get there. I mean, if you say that in your application, you're going to get a refusal. It's valid. I mean, you might in the future apply legally to become a permanent resident, but that your main purpose needs to be studies. And to prove this, I mean, we design something with our clients, which is a study plan. Basically, we want to show that this is why I want to study this. This is why I chose this program. This is why I chose Canada. And these are the opportunities that this is going to open to me once I return to my home country. I sometimes tell people it's a bit of a fiction, the whole returning to the home. I mean, if I have to return to my home country, like if we want to see it that way. I mean, some clients might not want to return to their home country. At least, I mean, if they have to, they will, of course. But their purpose might be to find a job in Canada and do a permanent residence, which is valid, right? But the way that we need to present it is always, what opportunities are these studies going to present to me when I go back to my home country? This is individual. If you're copying and pasting study plans, you're doing it wrong. Every client case is different. Refusals on bona fide students for non-bona fide students may only withstand legal challenge when the refusal is based on the information related to the specific case. Cultural context might be taken into consideration. Maybe there's a lot of people from a country that undertake these studies, I don't know, but they're not in good faith, but that's not enough. You still need to assess individually. The person and the officer is supposed to be, in theory, according to the program delivery instructions, instructed to provide detailed notes about why they refuse. I can tell you something. This is a very common ground for refusal in study permits. Whenever you see a refusal, it says the purpose of your trip to Canada, the purpose of your stay in Canada, the purpose of your visit to Canada, they're referring to this, the bona fide studies, whether you prove that you're coming to Canada, why is it that you're coming to Canada to study? But even though they're a very common ground for refusal, I can also tell you that when we bring these cases to judicial review with a solid study plan, they tend to go back into redetermination, almost always. And we tend to get the approval after the redetermination. I sometimes know that a client from Dubai who hasn't lived in their country of their passport in many years is likely going to get a refusal based on this or ties to home country, whatever it is. But if we have a very strong case and we go to judicial review, we might get accepted. And the reason for this is because it's so specific to the individual that if you have a solid study plan that says, this is why I want to study this, this is the opportunities that it's going to provide me, and this is why I chose this institution in Canada, it's very hard for an officer to say, well, that's not true or that's not valid. At the end of the day, the officer doesn't get to decide for you what you should study, right? And on the other hand, what we normally find is that officers don't really go into that much detail in their notes, but they basically say, client is an engineer and they want to study a project management degree. I don't see any purpose. This doesn't make sense to me, or something like that. And they just don't say why. And if they say that in an application that didn't have a study plan, okay, there's not much we can do. We're going to have to apply again. But if I prepared a 2-page study plan explaining why this project management program is so important to my client because they work in the construction business, they want to get to managerial opportunities, and they don't have the skill set that this program is going to provide them, and this degree is important for those construction companies to be able to get to those positions, then it's very hard for an officer's refusal to withstand legal challenge. So I find, the first thing that I do when I'm assessing a refusal is just like, where's your study plan? Oh, I didn't include one. Well, there's not much that we can do. You're going to have to apply again. But if I read the study plan and it was a solid study plan, then maybe we can find this. Okay, let's talk about a study plan. Let's take a look at the case law, and then maybe we'll take a break after that. But let me take a look at the questions. Hi, Andrew. Can I confirm that the PAL only needs to be valid for the day of the application? That is correct. If you submit, that is correct, Dick Paul. So basically, if you submit the application and then the PAL expires while it's being processed, then that's fine. I think even if you submit an application and it's refused, but you reopen it through a judicial review, you can still use an old PAL. Haley's asking, is getting a PAL for your clients our scope of? No, it's not our scope at all. The education agency will do it. Quite frankly, and I know that there's some education agents here in this course, at least the one who works with us. So feel free, Albert, if you want to mention something. But I think that the schools are issuing it automatically. So basically, they issue the letter of acceptance and they issue the PAL at the same time. Even in cases where, as I said, the client doesn't seem to need it, we're finding that they're issuing it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the study plan. I think, yeah, I get to that in a second. But let's talk about things that concern me when I'm doing a consultation about, oof, this is going to be a more difficult case. Or this one's going to require a very solid study plan to overcome what are kind of like obvious concerns that an officer might have, okay? So for instance, an applicant who's like in their 40s, even more, late 30s, they've already quite accomplished in their career. Why are they going back to school? Now, some cases are easier to justify, like an MBA. People do an MBA many different points in their lives. But someone who might be an executive already now wants to do a project management degree. It's just like, really? I mean, you're already an executive. What is a project management degree gonna give you? Unless maybe you're changing industries, like you're already at the highest position in your company, what is this going to give you? And it doesn't necessarily have to do with age, but normally with age comes clients that have had a very, they've had a career that has involved a lot of different things, right? Sometimes, also a lot of people don't study at advanced age. So I think most officers would see, okay, a 20, 30 something year old, that's someone who I expect to be studying. Someone in their 40s, 50s, a little bit of an issue. Or again, you need to have a very good justification. Drastic change in career study path. Those are cases that are very difficult. Those are cases that I normally tell the client, you know what, we might get a refusal and we might do a judicial review and we might be successful, but just be prepared for this. At the same time, I'm not a career counselor. I'm not the person who's allowed to tell the client, don't do this. And I've had this happen. I had a client who was a successful businesswoman for all of her life, was retiring, now wanted to open a pastry shop at a very touristy place in Turkey. And she wanted to apply for a study permit. So we explained that she's retiring, that she has this, that she's registered this name, and that she wants, to be able to open a pastry shop, she needs to do a pastry degree. She wants to do that in Canada. Was it refused? Went to judicial review. Another client who was also an executive for many years, very successful business person, now wants to study theology because he wants to dedicate the rest of his life to preaching. And there's not many Lutheran schools in India, so he was looking for a Lutheran school in Canada. Refused, went to judicial review, approved after. And I knew these were going to be difficult because I wasn't going to be able to draw from their past experience or their education, but we had a very solid study plan that explained why they wanted to do this at this point in their career, that they were very well connected in the case of this Lutheran student with the churches there. And again, those are difficult cases. But what you want to make sure is that when you're asking your client about this and they say, well, I chose this program is because my education consultant told me to, I'm not really interested in this. And they'll be like, then abort. This is not what you're interested in doing. Find something that you're interested in doing. Going down in level of education can be tricky, but again, it's a matter of explanation. Sometimes officers tend to infer that if you're going from university to college, you're going down in level of education, but that's not necessarily the case. Canadian education is very different than the rest of the world. Some programs are not offered in universities in Canada. So I've had a lot of successful engineers who want to do project management, and that is offered at a college. I've had successful software engineers who are doing something very specific about artificial intelligence and data analysis that it's not offered by universities, or they might be masters, but there's not many programs, but some colleges have excellent programs in that. So I can justify why this person, a software engineer, is now doing this artificial intelligence cutting edge program in Canada that's not offered in their home country, and that is very important to what they plan to do. Okay. But so those are cases that I think we can justify. But if you have someone who is a civil engineer and now is doing a civil engineering technology in Canada, that is very difficult to justify, because that almost seems like going back down, or doing redundant degrees. If they already have a civil engineer degree, why are they doing another, or civil engineering technology degree back home, why are they doing another civil engineering technology? So when the programs are redundant, or it does seem like not only redundant, but like you're actually studying less now than before, that's when you need to justify it. Sometimes a choice of, I mean, a big school in a big city might be easier than a smaller school, but I don't really worry too much about that. I try to focus more on what's the syllabus of this program that I can justify. If you have someone who's in Canada, who's there's as a worker and their status is about to expire, and now they're applying to study, sometimes they might see it as like, oh, you're just doing this to try to extend your time in Canada. If you're in unemployment always worries me. Someone who's been unemployed for 7 years and now they want to study, it's like, okay, so you don't seem to have very good opportunities. And it depends on the case. Or sometimes you might have someone who's an engineer, but been working only on customer service, and now they want to do a master's in engineering. And it's like, why are you going to invest all this money if you haven't been able to find an engineering job? Okay. But I've also had different cases where I have someone who's been out of work because they've been taking care of their children for many years. And now to get back into the industry, they want to be able to do a master's or do something that's going to make them more competitive as they get back into the industry. And that's a good justification. Family in Canada, again, this goes more to like ties to home country as well, but sometimes they can be inferred that the reason why they want coming here is for that. Just quickly looking at some of the questions when I submit the study plan. Yeah, I put it in the client's words. Basically, the client prepares it either in English, or since I speak Spanish, in Spanish, and then we turn it into English, and I put it in their own words, not my words, their own words. Does the PAL expire after using it once? No, I think you can use a PAL again. So let's say you get a refusal on a study permit, and the PAL still is valid, you can use it again for a new study permit application. It's not like an LMI. And then Mark is saying, yeah, there's some ageism there for sure. Sometimes people say, why someone at their 40s are studying? And sometimes they generally want to study. It's not just a matter of immigrating to Canada. Okay, so the reason why we have Patel there, and with the cases, I'm not going to be reading the whole slide. You have them there. I think this one has to do more with procedural fairness. That if the officer is going to be making conclusions about the credibility of the applicant and why they want to study something, and impugn like the authenticity of the credibility of the client, this is something that should be put to them. And then this is so basically on judicial review, Justice Walker ruled that this statement were speculative. I mean, you can't be just speculating about their good faith or their bona fide credibility. Likewise, and here, like the judge concludes, the officer's conclusion that Mr. Patel would not be a good faith student reflected a concern with the genuineness of the application. Thus, he owed Mr. Patel an opportunity to address concerns. So there's not only the issue on judicial review, which is not what I do, but my colleagues do. There's not only the issue of whether there was enough evidence for the officer to have not concluded what they concluded, but I think you can make an argument too that if the officer is going and saying, okay, no, I have all this evidence, but I don't believe that there's credibility issues here, those should be put to the applicant. I'll deal with the elements of the study plan first, and then I'll do with a few questions that have come up before we take our break. Addressing genuineness in study, so in study permit applications, case specific, no copy pasting, discuss this with your client, ask them. We normally give them like a set of questions and tell them, please answer this question so that we can prepare a study plan or prepare a draft. Sometimes the clients, in applying to university, they would have kind of like put some of these things into paper. So we use that. If something seems like a concern, if I'm telling a client, you're already a mechanical engineer, why are you doing a mechanical engineering technology? I need to get like a very clear explanation, which basically says, well, this program is about automation. This program is about this. It's very different than the program that I did. Automation is very important to my day-to-day experience. I also work for US company. So getting this degree on automation specifically from an English speaking school is really going to open opportunities for me to more senior positions. Okay, that makes sense. Even though to me, the program seems redundant. But make sure you raise those concerns with your clients, because if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to the officer. And prepare a study plan. And we'll talk about the elements of a study plan. I include a study plan with every single application I submit. Normally, I include it in the client document. So under the box of client documents, sometimes I include other things there like job letters, education documents, properties that they have. But make sure that the study plan is there and that you label it study plan and that you explain, I mean, in the file, you say that the study plan is there so that the officer can easily get to it. You need to justify that the studies are reasonable based on your past work experience or education education. You must justify the expense of studying in Canada. Why coming to Canada? Why not studying this in your home country? What's different from locally available programs? And in some countries, country-specific checklists, they say, okay, you need to prepare a letter that covers this. So if they do have very specific direction as to what needs to be in the study plan, I try to incorporate that. But I found the study plan that I normally prepare, it addresses everyone. And even if the application the country-specific checklist doesn't say to include a study plan, I include one everywhere. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, we'll try to finish this topic before we take a break. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that I look at. Why do you select the study program? How do I tie it to your professional and academic history? How does it differ from programs here? Why Canada? And I really try to incorporate the client's own writing and words into the plan, even though, I mean, I write it well. I don't try to purposely put like grammar or spelling mistakes there. I'll give you just an example. I'll give you, if you want, a couple of examples, but let's start with one. I have someone who is an engineer who's been civil engineer, working in civil engineering for the last 10 years, now wants to do a project management degree at the college level. So seems like he's going down in level of, education, but it really isn't. Why does he want to study this? Well, very simple. I mean, he has the technical training. He's been working on the field, on the technical aspects. He doesn't have the experience in managing people or the education in managing people, but he's aspiring to get to management jobs, maybe senior management. The only way to do this is get that education, get that degree. This degree in project management is really valued in whatever country. That experience is really valued. He feels that to be able to get to those jobs, which are better paying, he needs to have this degree, which is not part of his past experience. Why Canada? Why not study this in Peru? Well, Peru doesn't have this type of project management degrees. They have a master's, but they're very general masters that don't have this application that this program has. They're also more expensive sometimes, or sometimes they might be longer. He's just looking for this 1 year or 2 year management degree. Sometimes you might project management diploma. Sometimes some of the diplomas actually in Canada, they're so specific, and it's education in Canada is so diverse that I've had some project management degrees that are specifically targeted towards engineers or people who work in construction. So even like more of a reason why they want to study this program and not a locally available program. And sometimes I can even throw in, he works for a friend, I don't know, like a European company where a lot of the assignments, a lot of the instructions come in English. So having a degree from an English speaking institution opens doors. That's normally what I get there. Sometimes the programming, the locally available programs sometimes are not the same. They don't have the same depth. They might take longer. Why would I send, I've had, for instance, like, no, these are 18-year-olds, so these ones are always easy to justify. Someone who's going from high school to post-secondary, regardless of what it is, it's the natural progression. Same thing with a master's. It's normally, you can say it's a natural progression, but sometimes I have clients who say, I had a client, for instance, we recently had one that had started a 5-year degree in Latin America in, I think it was design. And then they switched to do a 3-year degree in specific type of design. I forget one, at some institution in Ontario. And basically, I mean, what some of the justification would be like, if I finish that 5-year degree in Latin America, I forget if it was Colombia or Peru where it was, I'm not going to have the very specific knowledge on graphic design, which I can have in this 3-year degree. That's what I want to do. That's where I want to push my career. Most programs outside of Canada don't have paid co-op components, paid placement components. And if you're doing something like, I don't know, software development, if you're doing something like, it could be anything. If you have a co-op placement, you have an advantage compared to someone who hasn't done that as part of their education. So there's many things that you can justify: reputation of Canadian schools, professional opportunities with a Canadian degree, advantages to pursuing a degree in English or French. We had someone who came to Canada to do a master's. It was easy because it was a master's, but she was doing a master's in French language in Canada, at Ottawa University. Why studying in Canada, not Colombia? Well, that doesn't exist in Colombia, right? Her goal is to become like French as a second language and French literature professor in Colombia, and like the only places that she can pursue this is places where they speak French. And she specifically chose this program because it has a trans-systemic nature. Since Canada is a bilingual country, they teach a lot about teaching French as a second language. So it was more valuable studying it here than in France, for instance. So those are the kind of justifications that we do in a study plan. A lot of detail, a lot of goes into study plans. I review every study plan that's going to go out our office, out the door. Someone else might prepare it from what the client sends us, but I really always take a look at them. Lynn is asking, for a student who has been accepted to the University of Toronto for this fall but has yet received their study permit, what are some effective ways to follow up with that? Okay, let's do that question at the end. Okay, if you want, Lynn, let's save that for at the end. What happens if you haven't received a response? And fortunately, there's not much that can be done, but we can talk about some of those alternatives. So definitely ask it there. These are some of the questions that I ask clients at the beginning that help me kind of like prepare that study plan. You have it in your slides, so I'm just going to leave it there.